If you grew up with a parent who was emotionally distant, hard to reach, or cold in the way they treated you, chances are you've spent a lot of your life wondering what was wrong with you, why they couldn't show up the way you needed, why their love always felt conditional, or worse, invisible. And if that was your childhood, you probably carry quiet wounds that most people around you will never fully understand. But here's what nobody tells you. The experience of being raised by a cold or emotionally unavailable parent, as painful as it was, and still is for many of you, didn't just leave scars. It also quietly built something inside you, something rare, something that most people who grew up in warmer, more emotionally supportive environments simply don't have. Today we're going to talk about 4 rare qualities that people who had cold parents tend to develop over their lifetime. Not to minimize the pain, not to pretend the experience was okay, but to help you see yourself more clearly. Because you've been through something hard, and you deserve to understand what that hard thing actually gave you. Let's begin. Quality number 1, an extraordinarily deep level of self-awareness. When you grow up with a cold parent, you learn very early that the emotional environment around you is unpredictable. Maybe your parent was critical without warning. Maybe they withheld affection, and you never quite knew why. Maybe they were physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. As a child trying to make sense of this, you did what all children do. You looked inward. You started asking questions about yourself. Am I too much? Am I not enough? What did I do wrong? What can I do differently? Now, those questions were painful, and in many cases they planted seeds of self-doubt that you're still working through today. But psychology shows that this early habit of deep internal questioning is one of the foundations of self-awareness. Research in developmental psychology suggests that children raised in emotionally unpredictable environments often become highly attuned to their own thoughts, feelings, and behavioral patterns far earlier than their peers. In other words, you became an observer of yourself. And while that came at a cost, it also means you're someone who genuinely thinks about why you do what you do. You don't just react, you reflect, you notice, you question. Most people spend their entire adult lives trying to develop that quality through therapy, meditation, journaling. You built it as a survival skill in childhood. Think about how rare it is to be someone who actually asks themselves, why do I feel this way? What does this reaction tell me about myself? That's not common. That's you. And it came from something that hurt you deeply. Quality number 2, an unusually strong emotional resilience. Here's something that might surprise you. Emotional resilience isn't built in comfort. It's built in difficulty. And one of the most profound difficulties a human being can face, particularly in the formative years, is not being emotionally held by the person who was supposed to hold them. When a parent is cold, a child doesn't just experience sadness. They experience a kind of emotional training ground, whether they want to or not. They learn to self-soothe. They learn to sit with discomfort without anyone rescuing them. They learn that feelings come and go, even the really terrible ones, because there was no one to make the terrible ones stop. They had to outlast them on their own. Psychology shows that individuals who experienced emotional unavailability in childhood and went on to do some healing and reflection in adulthood often demonstrate remarkable resilience when facing life's hardest moments. Research indicates that people who had to self-regulate emotions early in life tend to have a higher threshold for tolerating uncertainty, setbacks, and emotional pain. This doesn't mean you don't feel things deeply. Many of you reading this feel things intensely, but it does mean you have a quiet endurance that others around you may not fully understand. When life falls apart, you don't crumble the way people might expect. You've been through emotional storms before. You've survived. And somewhere deep inside you, you know you'll survive this one too. That knowing is resilience, and it lives in you because you had to grow it yourself, without a guide. Quality number 3, a profound capacity for empathy. People who grew up longing for emotional warmth often become the warmest people in the room. There's something deeply ironic about this, but it makes complete psychological sense. When you've spent your childhood aching for someone to truly see you, to hear you, to acknowledge what you're feeling, you become someone who notices when others need to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. Psychology shows that children who experienced emotional neglect often develop what researchers call heightened empathic sensitivity. Because they were so attuned to reading their parents' moods, trying to figure out when it was safe to approach, when to stay quiet, when to try harder, they became fluent in the unspoken emotional language of other people. They learned to read a room, read a face, read the tension in someone's voice before a word is even spoken. As adults, this often translates into a rare and beautiful quality: the ability to make people feel deeply understood. You're probably the friend people call when they're falling apart. You're the one who notices when someone is struggling, even when they're smiling. You're the one who says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, not because you rehearsed it, but because you genuinely feel what the other person is going through. And while this gift can sometimes be exhausting, particularly if you never learn to set boundaries with your empathy, it is still a gift. The world is not full of people who can truly sit with someone else's pain. You can, and that came from knowing what it feels like when nobody sits with yours. Quality number 4, a powerful and enduring independence of self. When the person who was supposed to be your emotional anchor wasn't available, you had to become your own anchor. This is one of the most significant and lasting effects of having a cold parent, and it cuts both ways. On one side, it can leave you with deep fears of depending on others, with walls that are hard to lower, with a tendency to do everything yourself because you learned early that asking for help often led to disappointment. But on the other side, it quietly built something extraordinary: an internal sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation to survive. Research in attachment theory, originally developed by psychologist John Bowlby, shows that while children with emotionally unavailable parents often develop what's called insecure attachment styles, those same individuals, when they do their healing work, often develop a capacity for what psychologists call earned security. This is the process of building a stable, grounded sense of self, not because someone gave it to you, but because you built it yourself, piece by piece. This means that you are someone who doesn't completely fall apart when someone withdraws their approval. You've already lived through that. You know how to keep going when the emotional environment around you isn't supportive, because you've been doing that your whole life. You have a core inside you that belongs entirely to you. And while it may have been forged in loneliness, it is real, and it is yours. Think about that for a moment. In a world where so many people are constantly looking outside themselves for permission to feel okay, you've been quietly building an interior life that can stand on its own. That is rare, and it is powerful. Now, before we close, there's something important that needs to be said. None of this means what happened to you was okay. None of this means you deserved a cold parent, or that the pain doesn't matter, or that you should simply be grateful for what the experience gave you. The grief of an emotionally unavailable parent is real, and it is valid. And for many of you, it's something you may be processing for years. But healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. Healing means being able to look at your full story, the painful parts, and the hidden gifts, and say, "This is who I became." And who I became is someone worth knowing. If you recognize yourself in any of these 4 qualities, I want you to sit with that for a moment. The self-awareness that came from constantly trying to understand yourself, the resilience that came from having to outlast the hard feelings alone, the empathy that came from knowing what it means to not be seen, and the independence that came from having to build yourself from the inside out. These are not small things. These are the qualities of someone who has walked through something genuinely difficult and emerged more layered, more perceptive, and more capable of deep human connection than most people ever become. You didn't get the childhood you deserved, but look at who you became anyway. That matters. You matter. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel for more psychology insights that help you understand yourself more deeply. And if you know someone who grew up feeling unseen or emotionally alone, share this video with them. Because sometimes the most healing thing we can offer someone is the reminder that their story made them strong, not in spite of the pain, because of how they carried it.